Welcome to System 2.
You ever get that feeling? You turn on the news and they're telling you the economy is just booming, growth is strong, but then you look around your own life, your community, and it just doesn't feel that way. Well, that paradox is real, and today we're going to get into exactly why it happens. Okay, let's just dive right in. This quote from the former French president, Nicolas Sarkozy, he just nails the problem, doesn't he? For decades, we've basically relied on one single headline number to tell us how we're all doing. But what if that number is telling a completely wrong story? To really understand this gulf, we need to properly introduce the main character in our whole economic story. It's a metric that has pretty much taken over the world: gross domestic product. Now, on the surface, it seems simple enough, right? GDP is basically just a big tally of all the economic activity in a country. We hear about it all the time. But this super simple definition hides some truly bizarre quirks in how it's actually calculated. Think of it this way. If GDP were a person, it would be a cold-hearted accountant, totally indifferent to morality. It doesn't care if you're selling life-saving medicine or if you're selling cigarettes. It actually loves pollution because, hey, spending money to clean it up adds to the total. It cheers for crime because hiring more police and repairing broken windows, that boosts the numbers. GDP sees a hurricane or a war not as a tragedy, but as a fantastic business opportunity for rebuilding. It is great at counting, for sure, but it has absolutely zero judgment. So that's what GDP gets wrong. But what's maybe even more important is what this all-powerful number just leaves out completely. Turns out the things we often value the most are totally invisible to it. I mean, just think about the immense foundational work that gets done inside our own homes. If you pay for childcare, that service gets added to the national accounts. But if a parent stays home to raise their own child, doing the exact same valuable work, it's valued at zero. In the eyes of GDP, it literally doesn't exist, just because no money changed hands. And this example shows just how perverse the logic can be. Breastfeeding, which gives enormous health benefits for free, is statistically worthless. In fact, get this, if more mothers breastfed, GDP would actually go down because of a loss in formula sales. So you end up in this crazy situation where a costly substitute is counted as an economic positive, while the better, free alternative is completely ignored. And this blindness, it extends right into our digital lives. Your Spotify subscription? Yep, that adds to GDP. But what about the incredible value you get from using Wikipedia for free, or Google search, or all the other amazing digital tools that have totally transformed our access to knowledge? Because they're free to use, their direct value just doesn't get into the calculation. But the problem is even bigger than what GDP misses. Let's talk about the harmful things that it actively counts as economic progress. So if a country wanted to maximize its GDP and nothing else, it could follow this bizarre playbook. A hurricane that destroys a city? Fantastic for GDP, thanks to all that rebuilding. Rising crime? Great, more spending on police and security. Pollute a river? Wonderful. The cleanup costs will boost the economy. And as we're about to see, making healthcare less efficient is a surefire way to inflate your national income. This is one of the most glaring examples anywhere. The United States spends about 17% of its entire economy on healthcare. That's nearly double what most other advanced nations spend. And this massive spending makes US GDP look enormous. But what does it actually deliver? A life expectancy that ranks 31st in the world? It's a system that is incredibly expensive, which GDP sees as a huge positive, but it delivers mediocre results for human well-being. So you see, this isn't just some academic debate about statistics. This obsession with a flawed number has a real, tangible human cost. It's what creates that jarring disconnect between the official story and people's actual lived reality. Let's look at the United States between the years 2000 and 2015. On paper, the economy grew by a solid 30%, even after you adjust for inflation. The headline number looked pretty good, but what was really going on underneath all that?
Well, during this period of supposed growth, a much longer and more damaging trend was picking up speed. Trust in institutions was in total freefall. Back in the mid-1960s, nearly 80% of Americans trusted their government. By 2017, that number had collapsed to less than 20%. People just felt the system wasn't working for them, no matter what the GDP figures said.
And here is why. The benefits of that growth, they weren't being shared. During the recovery after the 2008 crisis, a staggering 91% of all income gains went to the wealthiest 1% of the population. For the vast majority of people, there was no recovery to feel. The pie was getting bigger, sure, but only one tiny slice was actually growing. In fact, for many, things got tragically worse. Researchers started identifying this horrifying trend that they called deaths of despair. For the first time in modern history, the mortality rate for middle-aged white Americans, especially those without a college degree, actually started to rise. It was driven by suicide, drug overdoses, and alcohol-related disease. It was a silent epidemic of hopelessness, fueled by economic insecurity, and it was completely invisible to our main measure of national success. So, if our main metric is broken, what's the alternative? Thankfully, there is a global movement of economists, statisticians, and policymakers who are working on creating a better report card for our societies. There isn't one single answer, but more like a toolkit of options. The first idea is to fix GDP. We could create a green GDP that starts with the current number but then subtracts the costs of pollution. The second approach is to complement GDP, creating a dashboard of indicators that sit right alongside it, tracking things we care about like health, education, and security. And the third, most radical option is to replace GDP as our main goal, shifting our focus to a direct measure of well-being, like what Bhutan famously pioneered with its concept of gross national happiness. This quote really forces us to ask a fundamental question. We've been taught that the goal of an economy is just endless growth, but in any other natural system, infinite, indiscriminate growth isn't a sign of health, it's a sign of disease. And that leaves us with one final thought to really chew on. If we change the way we measure success, if our national goal was to maximize well-being, health, and sustainability, instead of just raw economic output, how would our policies change? What would we choose to invest in? What would we protect? And ultimately, what kind of society would we build?